Sarah Matthews stood motionless in her daughter's bedroom, her trembling fingers trailing across Emma's favorite purple sweater that still hung in the closet. The morning sunlight streaming through the window seemed to mock the darkness that had engulfed her life since losing her 16-year-old daughter just 3 days ago. The official cause of death was listed as a rare heart condition, sudden cardiac arrest, the doctors had said. But something about it didn't sit right with Sarah. Emma had always been healthy, athletic, and full of life. How could a heart condition take her so suddenly, without any warning signs? Sarah's eyes drifted to the collection of photographs on Emma's desk. Her daughter's bright smile beamed back at her from every frame. Emma at her sweet 16 party just 6 months ago, Emma with her best friend Lisa at the beach last summer, and Emma with her ex-boyfriend Marcus at the school dance. That last photo made Sarah pause. She remembered how Emma's behavior had changed after breaking up with Marcus 2 months ago. The grieving mother sat on the edge of Emma's perfectly made bed, which hadn't been slept in since that horrible night. She recalled how Emma had become increasingly withdrawn in the weeks before her death. There were whispered phone calls that would end abruptly when Sarah entered the room, and dark circles under Emma's eyes that suggested she wasn't sleeping well. "Mom, there are some things you just wouldn't understand," Emma had said during their last real conversation. Now those words haunted Sarah, playing over and over in her mind like a broken record. As she prepared for tomorrow's funeral, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important. The police had done a routine investigation, but with the medical examiner's ruling of natural causes, they hadn't looked too deeply into the circumstances surrounding Emma's death. Later that evening, while sorting through Emma's belongings, Sarah found her daughter's diary hidden between the mattress and box spring. Her hands shook as she opened it, but the last entry was dated 3 weeks ago and revealed nothing unusual. The more recent pages had been torn out. It was then that Sarah noticed something else: faint bruising on Emma's neck during the body viewing at the funeral home. The mortician had done an excellent job covering it with makeup, but a mother's careful eye couldn't be fooled. When Sarah had questioned this, she was told that such marks could appear naturally after death. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. Around 3 a.m., she made a decision that some might call crazy, but to her, it felt like her only option. She would place a small camera inside Emma's coffin before the funeral. Sarah owned a tiny spy camera she had once bought to catch a suspected thief at her small boutique. It was perfect. Small enough to be hidden discreetly, with enough battery life to record for several hours. She knew it was an unusual and perhaps even disturbing choice, but her maternal instinct was screaming that something was wrong. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the funeral home early, telling the director she needed a private moment with Emma. With trembling hands, she carefully positioned the camera in a flower arrangement near Emma's head, angling it to capture both her daughter's face and any activity around the coffin. As she stepped back to ensure the camera was hidden, Sarah whispered, "I'm going to find out what really happened to you, sweetheart. I promise." Throughout the day, as friends and family arrived to pay their respects, Sarah tried to act normal despite the growing anxiety in her chest. She noticed Marcus hovering near the back of the funeral home, checking his phone repeatedly and wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool temperature inside. Emma's best friend, Lisa, could barely look Sarah in the eye when offering her condolences. When the service ended, Sarah watched as they closed her daughter's coffin for the final time. The camera was still secretly recording, and she prayed it would somehow provide the answers she desperately needed. Little did she know, what she would discover on that footage would change everything she thought she knew about her daughter's death. As she drove home that evening, the setting sun casting long shadows across the road, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had just set in motion events that would either bring her peace or shatter her world completely. Sarah spent the night after the funeral pacing in her living room, waiting for the right moment to review the camera footage. Her mind kept drifting back to the strange changes she had noticed in Emma during those final weeks. 3 weeks before Emma's death, Sarah had noticed the first alarming signs. Her daughter had come home late from school, her usually neat hair disheveled and her favorite necklace, a birthday gift from her father before he passed away, missing. When Sarah asked about it, Emma had mumbled something about losing it during gym class, but her voice trembled as she spoke. The next day, Sarah had found Emma's phone in the laundry, its screen cracked. When she tried to return it, she glimpsed a text message that made her blood run cold. Remember what happens if you talk. Emma had snatched the phone away before Sarah could read more. Sitting now in her dimly lit living room, Sarah remembered more disturbing details. There was the time she'd heard Emma crying in the shower, and when questioned, her daughter had blamed it on stress from upcoming exams. But Sarah had noticed faint bruises on Emma's wrists that looked like finger marks. A week before her death, Emma had started taking different routes to school, claiming she wanted the extra exercise. She'd stopped hanging out with her best friend Lisa, who she'd known since kindergarten. When Sarah had run into Lisa's mother at the grocery store, she learned that Lisa had also been acting strange lately. The most troubling incident had occurred just 3 days before Emma's death. Sarah had woken up at 2 a.m. to find Emma fully dressed, sitting in the kitchen with all the lights off. Her daughter had jumped when Sarah turned on the light, quickly wiping tears from her face. "Mom, if something ever happens to me," Emma had said, her voice barely a whisper, "check behind the loose tile in my bathroom." But when Sarah had tried to question her further, Emma had plastered on a fake smile and claimed she was just being dramatic about school pressure. Sarah had checked behind the bathroom tile the next morning but found nothing. Now she wondered if Emma had removed whatever was hidden there, knowing someone was watching her. The day before Emma died, she had seemed almost normal again. She'd made pancakes for breakfast, laughed at her mother's jokes, and even planned a shopping trip for the weekend. Looking back, Sarah realized this had been Emma's way of saying goodbye. That final night, Emma had hugged her mother extra tight before going to bed. "I love you, Mom," she'd said, holding on longer than usual. "No matter what happens, please remember that everything I did was to protect you." Sarah had been confused by those words, but before she could ask what Emma meant, her daughter had hurried upstairs. Those were the last words Emma ever spoke to her mother. The next morning, Sarah found her daughter unresponsive in her bed. Now, as she prepared to watch the funeral camera footage, Sarah's hands shook as she connected the device to her laptop. She noticed something else that hadn't registered during her grief. Emma's diary was missing from its hiding place. Sarah was certain she'd seen it just before the funeral, but now it was gone. A quick search of Emma's room revealed more disturbing details she'd overlooked. The purple sweater Emma had worn the day before her death had a small tear in the sleeve, as if someone had grabbed it roughly. Under Emma's desk calendar, Sarah found a small piece of paper with a series of numbers that looked like a code or phone number. The most chilling discovery came when Sarah checked Emma's school bag one last time. Tucked into a hidden pocket was a small USB drive with the words "Open if" written on it in Emma's handwriting. The sentence was incomplete, as if Emma had been interrupted while writing it. As the clock struck midnight, Sarah finally gathered the courage to plug in the camera's memory card. Her heart pounded as she opened the video file, unaware that what she was about to see would reveal a truth far more terrifying than anything she had imagined. Something had happened in that funeral home. Something that would explain why Marcus had been so nervous, why Lisa couldn't meet her eyes, and why her daughter had died so young. The answers were all there, waiting in those recorded hours of darkness. The funeral home's security cameras showed Sarah arriving early that morning, but they couldn't capture her placing the small camera inside Emma's coffin. As guests began arriving for the service, Sarah watched everyone carefully, noticing details that her grief-stricken mind had missed during the actual funeral. Marcus, Emma's ex-boyfriend, arrived 20 minutes late, slipping into the back row. His usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by nervous glances and trembling hands. Sarah noticed he kept checking his phone every few minutes, his face growing paler each time he looked at the screen. The funeral director had just begun the service when Sarah spotted 3 of Emma's classmates huddled near the entrance, whispering intensely. They fell silent the moment they noticed her looking their way. One of them, Jenny Parker, quickly wiped away what looked more like nervous sweat than tears. Lisa, who had been Emma's best friend since childhood, sat in the front row as expected, but her behavior was strange. Instead of sharing memories of Emma like the other friends, she remained silent, staring straight ahead. Her hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. Halfway through the service, Sarah's attention was drawn to an unexpected guest, Mr. Roberts, Emma's chemistry teacher. He stood at the back, his face unreadable behind his glasses. Sarah remembered Emma mentioning that she'd been staying after school for extra help in his class, even though chemistry had always been one of her best subjects. The most disturbing moment came during the eulogy. As Sarah's sister spoke about Emma's kindness and bright future, a loud phone notification echoed through the quiet room. Marcus jumped so violently that he knocked over a vase of flowers. Instead of helping to clean up the mess, he rushed outside, almost running. When he returned 10 minutes later, his face was ashen. Sarah watched as he passed a small note to Lisa, who read it, and immediately excused herself to the bathroom. She didn't return for nearly 20 minutes, and when she did, her makeup had been hastily reapplied over red, puffy eyes. Near the end of the service, during the final viewing, Sarah noticed something odd. As each person passed by Emma's coffin to say goodbye, Mr. Roberts lingered longer than necessary. His hand moved briefly inside his jacket, but Sarah couldn't see what, if anything, he had done. The most chilling moment came when Jenny Parker approached the coffin. She leaned down as if to place a flower, but Sarah clearly heard her whisper, "I'm sorry, Emma. We didn't mean for this to happen." As the service drew to a close, Sarah observed a silent exchange between Marcus and Mr. Roberts, a subtle nod that would have been meaningless to anyone else. But to a mother looking for answers about her daughter's death, it felt significant. The funeral director began closing the coffin, and Sarah felt her heart race, knowing her hidden camera was still recording. Just before the lid closed completely, she noticed Lisa make a sudden movement as if she wanted to stop the proceedings, but Marcus grabbed her arm, holding her back. After the service, as people were leaving, Sarah overheard fragments of conversations that seemed out of place at a funeral. Jenny Parker speaking urgently into her phone. "It's done. Everything's taken care of." Mr. Roberts telling someone on his phone. "No, nothing was left behind. We're clear." The last person to leave was Marcus. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking back at the closed coffin. His face showed something Sarah had never seen in him before, not grief, but fear. Pure, unmistakable fear. As Sarah drove home that evening, her mind raced with questions. Why had Marcus been so nervous? What was the note he passed to Lisa? What had Jenny Parker meant by her whispered apology? And most importantly, what had Mr. Roberts possibly placed in or taken from the coffin during his unusually long farewell? The hidden camera would have recorded it all. Every whispered conversation, every suspicious movement, every secret exchange. As Sarah parked her car in her driveway, she realized that the next few hours would either provide the answers she desperately sought or lead to even more disturbing questions. What she didn't know yet was that the footage would reveal something so shocking that it would change not only her understanding of Emma's death, but also everything she thought she knew about her daughter's life. Sarah's hands trembled as she connected the tiny camera to her laptop. The clock on her wall showed 11:47 p.m., nearly 8 hours after the funeral had ended. She took a deep breath and pressed play, watching as the first images appeared on her screen. The initial hour of footage showed nothing unusual, just the normal proceedings of a funeral. People walking past, paying their respects, some crying, others standing in silent prayer. But at exactly 2:47 p.m., everything changed. The footage showed Mr. Roberts approaching the coffin during his final viewing. His movements, which had seemed innocent during the funeral, now appeared deliberate and calculated on camera. He carefully slipped something under Emma's pillow while pretending to adjust his glasses. The camera caught a glimpse of what looked like a folded piece of paper. Minutes later, the recording captured Jenny Parker's whispered apology more clearly than Sarah had heard it in person. "I'm sorry, Emma. We didn't mean for this to happen. It wasn't supposed to go this far." The camera's microphone also picked up something Sarah hadn't heard at the funeral. Jenny adding in an even lower whisper, "The USB drive is safe. They'll never find it." Sarah paused the video, her mind racing. The USB drive she found in Emma's bag, could it be connected? She quickly grabbed it from her desk drawer, but decided to finish watching the footage first. The next shocking moment came after most people had left. The camera captured a conversation between Marcus and Lisa that no one else had witnessed. They thought they were alone with the closed coffin, unaware of the hidden recording device. "We'd have to tell her mother the truth." Lisa's voice cracked with emotion. "Are you crazy?" Marcus hissed. "If we talk, we're next. Don't you get it?" They'd already proved what they're capable of. "But Emma kept evidence," Lisa replied. "She told me about the—" Marcus cut her off sharply. "Shut up. They might be listening. Remember what happened to Emma's phone? Her diary? They're always watching." The conversation ended abruptly when they heard footsteps approaching. The camera continued recording in the growing darkness as the funeral home staff prepared to close for the evening. At 6:13 p.m., after the funeral home had closed, the camera captured something that made Sarah's blood run cold. The sound of a door quietly opening, followed by footsteps approaching the coffin. The infrared feature of the camera revealed a figure in dark clothing, their face obscured by a hood. The mysterious person spent several minutes searching around Emma's body, clearly looking for something. They became increasingly agitated when they couldn't find whatever they were seeking. Before leaving, they whispered something that made Sarah's heart stop. "Where did you hide it, Emma? The boss wants those files." Sarah quickly checked the timestamp, 6:13 p.m. She remembered the funeral home director saying they closed at 6 o'clock p.m. Someone had broken in after hours. Just as she was about to fast forward through the remaining darkness, movement on the screen caught her attention. The hooded figure had returned, this time with another person. Their whispered conversation was barely audible. "It's not here. Keep looking. Those files can destroy everything." "What about the mother?" "We're watching her. If she knows anything, we'll find out." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the implications. She wasn't just watching a recording anymore. She was watching evidence of a crime, and based on their conversation, she might be in danger too. The final moments of the footage showed the intruders leaving empty-handed, frustrated and angry. Before the camera's battery died, it captured one last whispered threat. "If anyone talks, they'll join Emma." Sarah sat in stunned silence as her screen went dark. Her daughter's death wasn't from natural causes, it was something much more sinister. The USB drive she'd found, the missing diary, the torn-out pages, the strange behavior at the funeral, it all started making a terrifying kind of sense. She looked at the USB drive on her desk, her hand shaking as she reached for it. Whatever Emma had discovered, whatever she had tried to expose, it had cost her her life. And now Sarah held what might be the key to understanding everything, or a target that could make her the next victim. With trembling fingers, she inserted the USB drive into her laptop, unaware that this action would reveal a truth more horrifying than anything she had imagined. The USB drive took several seconds to load, each moment feeling like an eternity to Sarah. When the contents finally appeared on her screen, she found a single folder labeled Evidence and a video file titled Watch_this_first dump 4. Sarah's hands shook as she clicked on the video. Emma's face appeared on the screen, recording herself in what looked like her bedroom. The timestamp showed it was made just 2 days before her death. "Mom, if you're watching this, something has happened to me," Emma began, her voice steady despite the fear visible in her eyes. "What I'm about to tell you is dangerous, but you need to know the truth." Emma explained how 3 months ago she had accidentally discovered something disturbing while staying late at school. She had been using the computer in the chemistry lab when she found the hidden folder on Mr. Roberts' laptop, which he had forgotten to log out of. The files revealed a complex scheme involving Mr. Roberts, several students, and what appeared to be a sophisticated cheating ring. But it wasn't just about selling test answers. They were hacking into the school's system, changing grades, and selling student data to the highest bidders. Marcus was part of it. Emma continued in the video. "When I confronted him, he tried to recruit me, said I could make thousands of dollars. But then I discovered they were also stealing personal information, credit card numbers, social security details, everything parents submitted to the school." Sarah paused the video and opened the Evidence folder. Inside were screenshots, documents, and recorded conversations that proved everything Emma was saying. There were lists of students involved, transaction records, and even threatening messages sent to students who tried to back out. Returning to the video, Emma revealed the worst part. Mr. Roberts isn't just a teacher. He's working with someone bigger, someone dangerous. They're using the school's database to commit identity theft on a massive scale. But when I tried to gather evidence, they found out. The camera shook as Emma wiped tears from her eyes. "They threatened to hurt you, Mom. Said they would make it look like an accident, just like they did with Jenny's older sister last year. Everyone thinks she died in a car crash, but she had discovered their operation too." Sarah remembered the accident, a local tragedy that had made headlines. Now it took on a completely different meaning. "I saved everything on this drive," Emma continued. The original files are hidden behind the loose tile in my bathroom, but I'm sure they'll find those. This copy is different though. I gave it to Lisa to hide, made her promise to get it to you if anything happened to me. The video cut to Emma standing up suddenly, responding to a noise off camera. Someone's here, she whispered. Mom, take this to Detective Rivera. Don't trust anyone else at the police station. They have people everywhere. And Mom, I'm so sorry. I love. The video ended abruptly. Sarah sat in shocked silence, her mind struggling to process everything. The strange marks on Emma's neck, the missing diary, the nervous behavior at the funeral. It all made terrible sense now. She quickly copied all the files to her laptop and a second USB drive, hands trembling as she worked. The footage from the funeral camera had captured the criminals returning to search for this very evidence. They knew Emma had hidden something, but they didn't know what or where. Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hope you're coping well with your loss. Remember, accidents can run in families. Her blood ran cold as another text arrived. The funeral was lovely. Shame about all those technical difficulties with the security cameras. They were watching her. Somehow, they knew about the camera she had hidden in the coffin. Sarah quickly gathered the drives, her car keys, and Emma's video. She had to get to Detective Rivera before they got to her. As she rushed to her car, Sarah realized that Emma hadn't died from a heart condition. She had been silenced. And now, armed with her daughter's final evidence, Sarah was about to become their next target. The truth about Emma's death had been revealed, but the danger was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Detective Lauren Rivera was working late at her desk when Sarah Matthews burst into the police station at 11:45 p.m. The detective immediately noticed the wild look in Sarah's eyes and the way she clutched her purse close to her body, constantly glancing over her shoulder. My daughter was murdered, Sarah declared, her voice shaking. I have proof. Detective Rivera, who had initially investigated Emma's death, quickly led Sarah to a private interview room. She remembered the case, a seemingly straightforward death from natural causes, but something in Sarah's demeanor made her listen carefully. Before we start, Sarah whispered, can you check if Officer Wilson is on duty tonight? The question caught Rivera's attention. According to Emma's files, Wilson had been one of the first officers to handle the case and had pushed hard for a quick closure. She assured Sarah that Wilson was off duty and closed the door. Sarah placed 2 USB drives and her laptop on the table. As the detective watched the funeral footage and Emma's final video, her professional demeanor cracked slightly. She had seen corruption before, but never anything this organized or involving a school. Mr. Roberts was hired 3 years ago, Rivera said, checking her computer records. Right when the identity theft cases in our district started increasing. She pulled up more files. And Jenny Parker's sister's accident. I always thought something was off about that investigation. As they reviewed Emma's evidence, Sarah's phone buzzed again with another threatening text. Talking to the police only makes things worse. Ask Officer Wilson. Rivera's eyes narrowed. They're watching the station. But how? She stopped mid-sentence and began examining the room carefully. In the corner, she discovered a tiny camera disguised as a smoke detector. We need to move, Rivera said quietly, writing on a notepad. This building isn't safe. Follow me. They quickly gathered the evidence and left through a back entrance. Rivera drove them to a small coffee shop she knew had no security cameras. As they sat in a corner booth, she explained why she had chosen this location. 3 months ago, I started investigating a series of suspicious accidents involving students and parents from your daughter's school. Every time I got close to something, the evidence disappeared or witnesses changed their stories. Sarah showed her the threatening texts. Rivera nodded grimly. They have people inside the department. That's why cases keep getting redirected or closed prematurely. Wilson isn't just a corrupt cop. He's their protection. The detective spent the next hour copying all of Emma's files to a secure server only she could access. Your daughter was brave, she told Sarah. She documented everything perfectly, transaction records, conversations, account numbers. This is enough to bring down their entire operation. But just as they were finishing, Rivera's police radio crackled with an alert. A break-in had been reported at Sarah's house. Then another report. A fire at the school, specifically in the chemistry lab. They're destroying evidence, Rivera realized. But they're too late. We have everything here. The detective made 3 quick phone calls to trusted colleagues in the FBI's Cyber Crimes Division. Within hours, federal agents were quietly surrounding the school, Mr. Roberts' house, and the homes of several other suspects. Go to this address, Rivera said, handing Sarah a key and a piece of paper. It's a safe house only I know about. Stay there until I contact you. As Sarah prepared to leave, Rivera gripped her arm. Your daughter didn't die in vain. We've been trying to crack this case for months. Emma gave us everything we needed. She just didn't live to see it. Sarah fought back tears as she asked, will they pay for what they did to her? Every last one of them, Rivera promised. The evidence is too solid, the conspiracy too clear. Even their connections won't save them now. As Sarah drove to the safe house, following Rivera's detailed instructions to avoid surveillance, she felt something she hadn't experienced since finding Emma, hope. Her daughter had died trying to expose the truth, and now that truth would finally come to light. But Sarah also knew that the most dangerous time in any investigation was right before arrests were made. Somewhere in the city, the criminals were realizing their operation was about to crumble. And cornered predators were always the most desperate and deadly. Detective Rivera's investigation moved swiftly over the next 48 hours. From the safe house, Sarah watched the news as the story exploded across local media. The headlines were shocking. High school crime ring exposed. Teacher arrested in massive identity theft scheme. Multiple officers suspended in corruption probe. Mr. Roberts was arrested at 3 a.m. while trying to board a flight to Mexico. His laptop, which he'd failed to destroy, contained even more evidence than Emma had discovered. The FBI's cyber unit found connections to international crime syndicates and proof of millions in stolen funds. Marcus broke under questioning within hours of his arrest. He revealed how the operation had started as a simple cheating scheme but evolved into something much darker. Students were recruited to help gather personal information from their parents' computers, promised easy money and perfect grades. Emma wasn't supposed to die, he confessed to investigators, his voice cracking. They just wanted to scare her. But when they found out how much evidence she had collected, someone decided she knew too much. The investigation revealed that Jenny Parker's sister hadn't been their first victim. 3 other accidents in the past 2 years were now being reinvestigated. All victims had connections to the school, and all had shown signs of discovering the truth before their deaths. Lisa finally came forward with her full story. She had been the one who helped Emma hide the second USB drive, sneaking it out during the funeral. Emma knew they were watching her house, she explained. She made me promise to wait until after she was gone, to get the drive to her mom. Officer Wilson and 2 other policemen were arrested for their roles in the cover-up. Bank records showed regular payments to their offshore accounts, matching dates when various cases had been mysteriously closed or evidence had disappeared. The scale of the identity theft operation stunned even experienced investigators. The school's database had been used to steal information from hundreds of families. Parents' credit cards had been cloned, bank accounts drained, and entire identities stolen and sold on the dark web. Mr. Roberts wasn't just a corrupt teacher. He was the local manager of an international criminal enterprise. The school had been specifically chosen for its wealthy demographic, providing access to high-value targets through their children's records. Sarah learned that Emma had first become suspicious when she overheard Marcus pressuring another student to install spyware on their parents' computer. When she investigated further, she discovered the entire network of corruption, including faculty members who were being blackmailed into silence. The criminal organization had a standard procedure for dealing with threats. First came warnings, then accidents. Emma had received both. The bruises Sarah had noticed, the missing necklace, the torn sweater, all were signs of escalating intimidation. From the safe house, Sarah read Emma's recovered diary entries, which the FBI had found hidden in Mr. Roberts' home. The final pages revealed her daughter's courage and determination. They think they can scare me into silence. But every threat they make, every time they try to intimidate me, I save more evidence. Mom always taught me to stand up to bullies. These people are just bullies with expensive suits and police badges. Someone has to stop them. Detective Rivera visited Sarah with updates each evening. The case was growing beyond anything they had initially imagined. The FBI had linked the operation to similar schemes at schools across the country. Emma's evidence had cracked open not just a local crime ring, but a national conspiracy. Your daughter was smarter than all of them, Rivera told Sarah. She didn't just collect random evidence. She created a perfect chain of documentation that even the best lawyers won't be able to break. As arrests continued and more people came forward, Sarah realized that Emma's death had accomplished what her life's final mission had been, protecting others from becoming victims. The scheme that had operated in shadows for years was now exposed to harsh light. But even as justice seemed within reach, Sarah couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The organization's top leaders were still unidentified. Somewhere, the people who had ordered Emma's death were watching their network collapse, and they weren't the type to go down without a fight. The question wasn't if they would strike back, but when and who their next target would be. 1 month after Emma's funeral, Sarah Matthews stood in a packed courtroom, watching as Mr. Roberts and his conspirators received their sentences. The judge's words were harsh, reflecting the severity of their crimes. Life sentences were handed down to the main perpetrators, while others received lengthy prison terms. The evidence Sarah had gathered from the funeral camera, combined with Emma's meticulous documentation, had created an airtight case. The criminal organization's attempts to fight back had failed. Their threats held no power now that the whole world knew the truth. Detective Rivera had been right about the larger conspiracy. The investigation had spread to 12 other schools across 3 states, leading to over 100 arrests. The criminal enterprise's leadership had tried to flee the country, but international police cooperation had led to their capture in Dubai. Sarah learned the full truth about Emma's last days through recovered security footage and witness testimonies. Her daughter had spent weeks building a case, secretly recording conversations, copying files, and creating backup plans. Even in death, Emma had outsmarted them. The USB drive hidden during her funeral had been her final masterstroke. Lisa, who had been granted immunity for her cooperation, shared emotional details about Emma's courage. She knew they were going to kill her, Lisa testified. But she said if anything happened to her, the evidence would come out anyway. She had planned everything. The investigation also revealed why Emma had been so concerned about protecting her mother. The organization had threatened to harm Sarah if Emma didn't stay quiet. Instead of backing down, Emma had used their threat as motivation to gather more evidence, ensuring they would be caught if they ever tried to hurt her mother. Jenny Parker's sister's case was reopened, along with other suspicious deaths. Families finally received answers about their loved ones, and more importantly, justice. The corruption that had protected the criminals for so long had been completely exposed and eliminated. Officer Wilson and his corrupt colleagues faced additional charges for their roles in covering up previous crimes. Their trials would come later, but their careers in law enforcement were permanently over. Sarah's hidden camera footage became crucial evidence in multiple trials. Legal experts called it the smoking gun that brought down an empire. The criminals' desperate attempt to search Emma's coffin had only added to the evidence against them, proving their guilt and desperation. On the day of the final sentencing, Detective Rivera handed Sarah a sealed evidence bag containing Emma's recovered diary and necklace. "She would want you to have these," Rivera said. "Your daughter was a hero, Mrs. Matthews. She saved countless families from becoming victims." Reading through Emma's complete diary later that night, Sarah found a letter addressed to her, written the day before her death. "Dear Mom, if you're reading this, they probably got to me. But don't be sad. Be proud. Everything I did to protect others, just like you always taught me. The evidence I collected will stop them from hurting anyone else. I love you, and I'm sorry for leaving you, but I know you'll understand why I couldn't stay silent. Love, Emma." 6 months after Emma's death, Sarah stood at her daughter's grave, placing fresh flowers beside the headstone. A small memorial plaque had been added, recognizing Emma's courage in exposing the criminal enterprise. The school had been renamed in her honor, and a scholarship fund had been established for students who demonstrated moral courage. Sarah had used part of the settlement money to start a foundation helping victims of identity theft and financial fraud. The Emma Matthews Foundation worked with schools nationwide to protect student data and prevent similar crimes from happening again. As she touched the cool stone of Emma's grave, Sarah felt a mix of pride and peace. The camera she had placed in the coffin hadn't just captured evidence. It had unleashed a chain of events that brought down an entire criminal empire. Her daughter's death had not been in vain. "You did it, sweetheart," Sarah whispered. "You protected everyone, just like you planned. And I made sure the whole world knows how brave you were." Walking away from the cemetery that evening, Sarah saw a group of students wearing Remember Emma badges, part of a new student advocacy program. Her daughter's legacy lived on, not just in the justice that had been served, but in the changes her courage had inspired in others. Emma's story had transformed from a tale of tragedy into one of triumph, proof that even in death, one person's courage could light the way for justice to prevail.